So you're looking for a project for your kids for school or for the scouts or something like that? Aquaponics, showing the small little aquaponics ecosystem and how that works, is going to not only knock the socks off the teachers, but give your kids a good understanding of how to grow food, some science, some plumbing, some measurements, some really great DIY skills. So let's jump on in and I'll show you how to build a small little demonstration system for an aquaponics ecosystem. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'm putting videos up every couple of days, so make sure that you hit subscribe so you can get all of them. Alrighty, how exciting is this? So I'm going to be able to show you all of the different parts that you're going to need, and there's going to be a list in the link down below that'll show you all of the parts that you're going to need to be able to do this as DIY as you can, recyclable as you can, and how exciting. But I'm not going to tell you the measurements because that is going to depend on the size of the fish tank you get and the height of different things, which I will explain as we go. So first off, you need a glass fish tank because that way you can all see all the little fishies. You can pick these up second-hand at any tip shops. You can ask on any local Facebook groups, does anyone have any? I found this on the side of the road. I gave it a nice good clean and filled it up to make sure it was going to hold water, and it did. So there are other videos showing you how to clean this. Sorry to interrupt. Look, to really boost your aquaponics learning, jump on over to my website for some free online training, and it's really structured and it's going to help you get a really good grasp of how this works rather than trying to pick it bits and pieces everywhere. Let's get the foundations happening, okay? So some free online training at www.theaquaponicslady.com. Jump on over and get your free training. Fish tank. The next thing we're going to need is a water pump. The type of water pump that you want is, we want the water to go straight up, and you're wanting it to be able to have the head height to the maximum level that we're going to be talking about. So we'll get to the pump again at the end, but for the moment I'm just going to go through and show you how to put together, and we'll talk about the rest. So we've got the pump at the bottom, we have the fitting that goes into the pump. This is a 13mm aquarium pipe that we have, which we are simply putting onto the pump, and we have a 13mm to a 15mm male adapter. The male adapter allows us to screw it into the next part, which I couldn't get it off the pipe. I can't believe it. It's pushed on that tight, I can't get it off. This is a female adapter for the 15mm PVC piping. And as you see, those two screw in really, really nicely. We want it nice and tight. With the aquarium hose, which is 13mm, which fits all standard aquariums, slots directly onto our pump. Then, what we have are some other parts, but before I get to that, this is just a rough stand that I've knocked up based on the height of everything that I'm doing. I've used everything that's just in my garage, and we're pulling it apart again. You will need to work out your own stand that will actually support all of the weight for as long as you're wanting to use it. Now, the next thing that we're using, we're wanting to get everything into, is a pail. One of those 25-litre pails that you can get from any hardware store. So what we're wanting to do is we want this pipe to bring water and all the fish waste up from the bottom of the fish tank into this pail. This pail is our filtration. It's our mechanical filtration. So it's going to remove all of the solid waste. Going through, we have a 90 degrees bend for the 15mm pipe. Another piece of piping pushing that on. Another 90 degrees to make it go nice and neatly in. Again, the measurements, and I'll go through the measurements in a few minutes, but they will vary depending on the height of what you're doing. So you can see, for instance, at the moment, that I've measured my height to be able to go into this pail. But how high did I want my pail to be? And that's based on the grow bed that I'm going to be putting here. This particular, I'm going to go through and measure them. As you can see, this particular pipe is 50 centimetres. And this pipe is 17 centimetres because it fits nicely. And that is taking into account the lip of all of the joins. So we're going to pull it out for the moment. That is taking our water into our filter. Now for our filter part. Just a pail. You can see I've already been using it. It's got lots of little holes that I've siliconed up. What we have, I have a piece of wood because what I'm wanting to do, this is a 2.5 litre, I think it was my honey container, and it sits nicely into that piece of wood that I've jigsawed a hole around. And by putting it on there, it allows me to have it all sitting up on top, which is perfect. Inside, and let's move these across for a minute. We don't need to have all of that showing. This is the next part of the filter that we're looking at. So the water is going to be coming into this section. Pretty cool. What we're wanting here, I've used my 25mm hole drill. Very carefully, remembering this is not UV stable. It is food grade, but it's not UV stable, and it's simple, easy plastic. It's not designed for long-term use or for drilling into. Very carefully, I've drilled my hole going through. I now have a male and female 20mm adapters and 2 O-rings that will sit on here. And what we're doing is the O-ring is on the bottom, and that's the male part that I am gently screwing in. I kind of always double up on my O-rings. I have an O-ring on the inside. Now, this part, if it does leak a bit of water, it's not going to be at the end of the world, but I just believe that if we can avoid it all the way, let's do. Male and female is now in there, and we have, I've lost a piece of piping. Where did it go? I have a piece of 20mm piping that's sitting here, and this is a 25 down to 20mm reducer that sits on top. That allows for us to be able to have a lot more water being pulled straight in very quickly, and the top of where that is, which is just below the lip, the water's going to get up to that high and then it's going to drop in, which is awesome. And just a tiny little bit of the piping down the bottom. This is the excellent part. It sits on here. Now, nope, I won't do that. Yep, we will do that. We'll pop it here. What this is the mechanical filter, so we don't want any solid waste to go into our grow bed that's going to be here. So taking a 90mm piece of PVC pipe, I've gone through and drilled holes. You can see holes are all the way around it. By using some of my aquarium matting from my indoor aquariums, what that does is it means that all of that solid waste will get caught in this matting, which will need to be cleaned. But that's okay. This part's easier to clean than trying to clean a grow bed. We don't need to screw this in or anything like that. It just simply sits on the inside of that container. Now the best part is all of this sits neatly on here. Now let's have a bit of a quick look back at where our water's coming up from the pump. Moving this across a little bit more. Not quite where I'm wanting it to be. There we go. We want this piping to be in between the filter matting and the piping in the container. And that sits nice and neatly in there. Water will come up into that container. The solid waste will be caught in the filter matting, and it will then drop down, all the water will drop down into this pail, which leads us to the next step. I'm going to keep pulling this apart and putting it back together again for each different step. Actually, we'll keep that out here this time. This one, you hear all the flutter drains happening around the house, around the place. I have already done I used my 25mm hole drill and I've drilled a hole here. This is the level that I want my pipe coming out of pail. Again, we have the male and female adapters that are 20mm. Now the reason I'm going with the adapters rather than a uniseal, with a uniseal I'd have to be getting a bit fancy and cutting a little bit extra space, whereas these would screw in really, really nicely. This seal needs to be very tight and no leaks. This is the one seal where we will have water being able to fall out. So again, uniseal on O-ring on the inside. I'm putting the male adapter on to hold it all in place. How perfect is that? And from there, we have a piece of 20mm piping that will go into here. And so we're getting there. This is just the putting it together part, but it works super duper well. Keeping that open there. Now, here is my caveat. A lot of people will put the grow bed straight on top of your glass aquarium. It will break. This is only a 60-litre aquarium with thin glass. And even though what I'm using here, this is, as I said, it's for a school project, so it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. But this is a storage container, 36-litre, holds weight. But if I have that filled up with water and expanded clay, that's going to be 36 odd kilo putting pressure on that. For any length of time, that is going to be a problem. Just like you're going to be having at any length of time, 25 litres of water sitting on that stand. So you need to make sure you've got a strong stand there. So I was a little bit creative with what I had in my backyard and my garage, and I put this together. A temporary thing that will hold water as a very temporary basis. But what it does is it takes the weight off the glass. And you can see that I also accidentally cut a hole in where I don't want that. What we do want is, hopefully you can see, finger coming through, finger coming through, finger coming through. I've done another hole using my hole drill, which was the 25mm hole drill, and I put it over on this side. Now, this is the whole reason why I've said I cannot tell you the size and the height and the width of your pipes. I can tell you the width of the pipes and the type of the pipes, but I can't tell you the measurements because I've used one of those old small little greenhouses that you can buy. I found on the side of the road, and it's got all of the metal stand parts. That's what I'm using. I've just done all of those fittings. Whatever frame you use will be a different height. Your container, which will be your grow bed, will be a different height. Your fish tank will be a different height. That will impact how high up your pail needs to be. Now what you can see is there is approximately an inch gap between the grow bed. So I'll be adding another tiny little piece of piping there. But I wanted that hole to be in that nice little gap. This makes it so much easier to show you and to do through the gap rather than anywhere else. Now we're wanting to make sure at this stage that I can still get that piping from the pump, which I've just moved, put it back in place. I want to make sure that I can still get to that. And what I can do, because we've added this part, I'll move this out of the way, and it will very carefully, very gently, wanting it to go in between filter, and there we go. So that's exactly how it needs to be. Now we have our grow bed. As I said, I've got the 25mm hole saw that I've done here, following the exact same principle with the O-rings, but with one key difference. If this is filled with expanded clay, okay, and you've got the water, the water and the gravel is filling up and dropping out or staying whatever, what you don't want is someone to say, hey, what's this for? Pulling it out, Because what this is a media guard. The other one I had drilled holes in. This one I have not drilled. I've used a handsaw to cut it to allow the water to go through. Just two different ways of doing it, but it does the same thing. And we want to keep that in place because what it does is it stops all of the gravel from getting into our standpipes, which I've dropped a piece of piping. That's a bit weird. Oh, no, here we go. Piping. So our standpipe will be in the middle of that, and we do not want some person, and I don't want to say kid because you know the amount of adults that do this, having our standpipe in the grow bed going, hey, what's this for? And pulling it out. So what we do in this case, we're putting a cap. So it gets a little bit more complicated, but all still fairly simple. We're going to have the male adapter coming up through the bottom. And be very careful. It's got the O-ring on it. Be very, very careful because this breaks really easily. I don't know, I broke it. And remembering this is not UV stable, not food grade. So it's not designed for permanent use, but it's perfect for a school project to be able to demonstrate how an ecosystem works. So I've screwed that in through that pre-existing hole that I've made, and I've made a hole in my 90mm cap, same size, that will now screw on. Actually, I did that wrong. I'm putting on the second O-ring first. I almost forgot my own routine. 2 O-rings. Now we're putting this cap on. And what I've done, the other thing is I've drilled holes. 3 holes, and 3 holes that will go into the base of here so I can actually screw that in. Because if it's not screwed in, it's so easy to pull out. But I've had to mark them so I know exactly where my screws need to go. Very carefully screwing that down. Then we're putting the female adapter on. Piece of piping. And again, I'll show you how I measured that. What we want within an aquaponics grow bed is you want a set amount of dry media, which is generally, depending on the size of your system, you would say 5 centimetres or 2 inches. And then all of the rest is what we call wet. So whether this is a flood and drain, so the water floods up and drains out again, floods up, drains out, or whether it's constantly at that level, that's just a choice thing that you can do. But what I've measured is I had to measure the pipe, including the female adapter and the cap and the O-ring, the distance there, to make sure that it was all at that level. Because I don't want it to go much higher than that level. Now, I'm going to bring this over and show you a bit more clearly. You can see I have all of the drilled holes with some little markings on them, which I have on the inside here, and that will tell me exactly where I'm needing to put. And what I would do is I would push that down using the screws that are in the fish tank down the bottom there. Using those screws, I would then screw that in, and they're stainless steel screws. I would screw them in, and that will then hold this media guard in place so no one can lift it out. You just don't want that happening. That, we need to then fill that up with expanded clay and then fill it all up with water. As I said, I need a tiny bit of piping, which I thought I had, but I've obviously put it somewhere else. That is the very basic setup of how this works. I want to go through and show you a little bit more in a bit more detail on how it works, but this is a very basic little example system that you can have set up as a school project for kids. How awesome is that? Now, before I go, there's a couple of things that I do want to talk about real quick. As I said, you want to make sure that you've got a strong frame, whatever you're using. This is not a strong frame, and I would not recommend using this. It's working for an example for me, but there are so many different options. I mean, I like the fact that I could have it on the outside, but what I would do differently is I would put a piece of wood here and drill some holes down the bottom so it's actually going to be firm where it's sitting. Again, this stand It's not a solid stand for this on a permanent or for a long-term basis, but it will do for what I'm trying to do. The heights will vary depending on how high your fish tank is, how high your grow bed is off everything. That will then determine how high you need to have your pail. So that's why we need to work out those heights first. So how I did that was I had my fish tank. I then worked out what stand I was going to use for the grow bed. From there I've then worked out how high I need to make that pail based on where I'm wanting that hole to be. Then the rest of the plumbing was really easy. So keeping in mind you're not UV stable, this will break in the sun after any length of time. And I'm talking even after a month depending on where you live. Just saying. It does depend on where you live, might not happen in a month. Also, a glass aquarium. When your fish are producing waste, which is all we want, they're producing ammonia, and make sure you check out my videos on how to cycle a system so you understand how to make sure that you've got filtration happening, you've got the biological filtration specifically happening, so that there's lots and lots of bacteria to convert all of the fish waste from the ammonia into fertilizer for your new veggies that you're going to put here. Make sure you check out that video, I'll show you how to do that, and I'll pop that in the link. But because you're going to have all of that ammonia that's being turned into fertilizer, a glass tank that is exposed to the sun in any way, that has that filtration, even if the filtration is working but it still has all that fertilizer in there, you're going to get algae in your glass tank. It's going to happen unless you put a cover around it. And that might mean that you put a cover around it while it's all happening and growing and doing all its thing. You know, some newspaper or some black plastic around it as a temporary thing until you're ready to actually present it. And it's also a way to be able to keep things hidden so that people can't see what's going on. You want to make sure that everything is stable. As I said, this container, this is very much how I can do an example for you. This is not a stable frame for any length of time. I know I keep repeating myself, but people often try to follow a video every single step, and I can't tell you the heights because that will depend on how big your fish tank is, on how high it is off the fish tank, all those sorts of things. I keep repeating myself. It's really important that you know that. We must remove solid waste before it goes into the grow bed, which will be filled with expanded clay. These are things that must happen, otherwise it will fail, it will not work, your fish will die. It's not the proper ecosystem. But when you get this running, and you have this all nice and stable, and you're aware that you might get some algae in the fish tank, you're removing the solid waste and the water's coming nice, and I'll show you how it looks flowing and running. This is a perfect little harmonious ecosystem that you can get the kids talking about. What is an ecosystem? How does it work? What happens in the nitrification cycle from the fish waste? What we're looking for is the ammonia, not the fish poop. We're removing the fish poop from the system. That's the whole point of this mechanical filtration part. We're removing all of that, and we're having a nice, clean system so it doesn't smell, it doesn't have any type of odor or anything like that, and it works really, really well. Now, before we go, I mentioned how high the head height needed to be on your pump. Remember how I said it depends on how high the water needs to rise up. This is where you need to measure the height. So this particular pump needs to be able to pump up 80 centimetres, well 70 actually, 80 centimetres takes it up a little bit higher. And it needs to be able to go through the system approximately 3 times an hour. So you need to work out the volume of what you've got here as to how much water and that will be cycling through 3 times an hour. But they all the fish pumps or aquarium pumps always say it's got a head height of whatever. And that is what's going to determine what size pump you get. So for instance, I had to go for a larger pump, so a stronger pump that went through more times per hour, so it would actually reach the head height of my barrel aquaponics system. So that meant my barrel aquaponics system was going up nearly 1.5 meters. So I had to go and make sure that the pump was going to pump up that high, but that meant that the water was running too fast. In which case, on this section here, if that is the case for you, you can only get a pump that has a high flow rate to get it up to that head height, put a T intersection under here, so it's in the fish tank, and then have a valve attached to here with some aquarium piping, and you'll be able to adjust the flow rate with that valve. What you're seeing here, and that will then slow everything down a little bit. Constant flow system. These are some of the options. So the water is constantly flowing, and the water is staying. That is the perfect concrete level to be able to knock the socks off all those teachers and get everything happening. And I'm going to show you now all the actually increase the tank water up to here. So, but as soon as I show you what my flood and drain system is, and I do not recommend that you do a flood and drain in a small little system, because to do that, all of this water will drain out of the grow bed and it will flood into the fish tank. So you see at the moment the fish tank itself is only 2/3 full. That's because I need to allow for all of this water to drop into here. So that means that when we work out how many fish we can put in there, we have to reduce the number of fish that we put in our system, because we have to allow for the water to drop out of here and be up here for a period of time. So if I put a bell siphon on here, and I've just got a little plastic one to show you as a demonstration, it'll show you what I mean by flooding out. So that water will now start very fast flooding out of here, draining out. It's draining all out of here. Now the pump itself is running a little bit too fast for this to break naturally, but I'm really just wanting to show you the example of why I would not recommend flood and drain in this situation. But as long as you've got the water moving and you don't overcrowd your fish, having it constant flow, so no bell siphon, it will work really well. You see how that water flow is now getting higher and higher up in that fish tank? Because we're draining out all of the water out of the grow bed. But what that means, and the problem that is for a small little system like this, is that when it's flooding the grow bed itself, it's draining all that water out of the fish tank. So that means less room for the fish, and technically that means you should have less fish in there. But a lot of people don't do that. And I don't want to drain out too much more because I'm going to run out of room in the fish tank. So I'm going to break that siphon. But that gives you the understanding. A flood and drain would be it floods up and it drains out, floods up and drains out. But in a small little system like that, while this is flooding, your fish tank is also draining, which is not a positive thing for this is only a 60 litre tank. So as we've got water moving, and you can put an air stone, so an air pump and an air stone in here, and have this, be perfect. It wouldn't really need to have an air stone because it is such a small little system and there is this water moving quite well. So I want you to pretend at the moment, actually we're not going to pretend, we're just going to do this demonstration and keep it like this. We're not pretending. I'm simply going to add dechlorinated water in here now, so I can keep my fish tank level nice and high. This is the water that I top up my aquaponics system with. It's been bubbling away, aerating to get rid of the chlorine. Quite handy having that right beside me. So by having it as a constant flow, you've seen how I've been able to add a few buckets of water to keep the water level at a high level. And I was a bit silly, I didn't take the I've got an elbow bend right at the back here. It's attached to my standpipe. I didn't take that off so I can't show you the water coming out. I don't think I can, I might be able to. No, not that one. This is the, not wanting to break the, there we go. So that will show you now. As soon as this hits that standpipe end, I'll bring the camera over so you can see. It's now hit the point where you can see that the water's starting to flow. Oopsie. Hold that thought.